The vast plateau of Iran, stretching from the Zagros Mountains to the Hindu Kush, witnessed the emergence of one of history's most enduring and formidable empires during the 3rd century BC. The Parthians, whose very name would become synonymous with skilled horsemen and deadly archers, arose from the windswept steppes of Central Asia to challenge the might of Rome and dominate the ancient world for nearly 5 centuries. Understanding their origins requires piecing together fragmentary historical records, analyzing archaeological evidence from remote archaeological sites, and examining the complex interplay of nomadic traditions and settled civilization that would shape their remarkable empire. The Parni, the nomadic tribe that would eventually become the Parthians, emerged from the vast grasslands beyond the Oxus River, where survival demanded exceptional horsemanship, tactical brilliance, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. These Iranian-speaking nomads, part of the great Scythian confederation that dominated the Eurasian steppes, possessed a martial culture centered on mounted archery and cavalry warfare that had been refined through centuries of conflict with neighboring tribes and settled populations. Archaeological investigations across the Iranian plateau have revealed a complex picture of cultural exchange and technological innovation that preceded the Parthian rise to power, with excavated sites displaying distinctive pottery, weaponry, and burial practices that demonstrate the sophisticated civilization these nomads would eventually create. The opportunity for Parthian expansion arose from the fragmentation of Alexander the Great's vast empire following his death in 323 BC. The Seleucid Empire, which had inherited the eastern territories of Alexander's conquests, found itself increasingly unable to maintain effective control over its distant provinces as internal succession disputes and constant warfare with rival Hellenistic kingdoms drained its resources and divided its attention. The province of Parthia, located in the northeastern region of modern-day Iran, occupied a strategically crucial position along the Silk Road trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with Central Asia and China, making it both wealthy and vulnerable to nomadic incursions from the northern steppes. Arsaces I, the legendary founder of the Parthian dynasty, led his Parni tribesmen across the Oxus River around 247 BC, seizing control of the Parthian province during a period of Seleucid weakness and establishing the foundation of what would become the Arsacid dynasty. The circumstances of this conquest remain shrouded in legend, with later Parthian historians creating mythological narratives that emphasize divine approval and heroic leadership, but the archaeological evidence suggests a more gradual process of infiltration and settlement that took advantage of local discontent with Seleucid rule. The early Parthian state that emerged under Arsaces represented a unique synthesis of nomadic military traditions and Hellenistic administrative practices, creating a governmental system that could effectively manage both nomadic tribal groups and settled urban populations. The consolidation of Parthian power under Arsaces I and his immediate successors involved the systematic integration of diverse populations throughout the Iranian plateau, from the nomadic tribes of the northern steppes to the sophisticated urban communities of ancient Persian cities. This process required remarkable diplomatic skill and cultural sensitivity, as the Parthian rulers needed to accommodate the religious practices, legal traditions, and economic interests of populations with vastly different backgrounds and expectations. The archaeological record from early Parthian sites reveals a deliberate policy of cultural tolerance, with Greek administrative practices continuing alongside Persian religious traditions and nomadic military customs, creating a cosmopolitan civilization that drew strength from its diversity. The military organization that enabled Parthian expansion represented a revolutionary advancement in ancient warfare, combining the mobility and archery skills of steppe nomads with the tactical sophistication necessary for conquering and holding vast territories. The core of Parthian military power lay in their heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, whose horses and riders were encased in scale armor that provided protection against enemy weapons while maintaining sufficient mobility for rapid maneuvers. These elite units, recruited primarily from the Parthian nobility, were supported by large formations of light cavalry archers whose composite bows could deliver accurate fire at distances exceeding 300 yards, creating a tactical system that proved devastatingly effective against the infantry-based armies of their enemies. The famous Parthian shot, a tactical maneuver in which mounted archers would feign retreat while continuing to fire arrows backward at pursuing enemies, became one of the most feared weapons in the ancient world and demonstrated the exceptional horsemanship and archery skills that characterized Parthian warfare. This technique, which required years of training to master, allowed Parthian forces to maintain continuous pressure on enemy formations while avoiding direct confrontation until conditions favored decisive action. The psychological impact of these tactics proved as important as their physical effectiveness, as enemy commanders learned to fear Parthian retreats as much as their advances, creating uncertainty that often led to tactical mistakes and strategic blunders. Mithridates I, who ruled from approximately 171 to 138 BC, transformed the Parthian kingdom into a major imperial power through a series of brilliant military campaigns that expanded Parthian control from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. His conquest of Media, with its wealthy cities and strategic mountain passes, provided the Parthians with crucial resources and defensive positions that secured their western frontier while opening routes for further expansion into Mesopotamia. The capture of Seleucia on the Tigris, one of the largest cities in the ancient world, demonstrated Parthian ability to conduct sophisticated siege operations and manage complex urban populations, skills that would prove essential for governing their expanding empire. The administrative system that developed under Mithridates I represented a masterful adaptation of existing governmental structures to Parthian political needs and cultural values. Rather than imposing a uniform administrative model throughout their territories, the Parthians adopted a flexible approach that preserved local traditions and institutions while ensuring imperial control through carefully selected governors and tribute arrangements. This system, which combined Persian administrative practices with Greek bureaucratic techniques and nomadic leadership traditions, created a governmental structure that could accommodate the diverse populations and geographical challenges of their vast empire, while maintaining the military effectiveness necessary for continued expansion. The religious policies pursued by the early Parthian rulers demonstrated remarkable tolerance and political sophistication, as they recognized that religious persecution would create unnecessary opposition and undermine the stability of their diverse empire. The Parthians allowed Greek cities to maintain their traditional religious practices and civic institutions, permitted Jewish communities to practice their faith without interference, and showed respect for the ancient Persian religious traditions that had deep roots throughout the Iranian plateau. This tolerant approach extended to the artistic and cultural sphere, where Parthian royal courts became centers of cultural synthesis that combined Greek artistic techniques with Persian themes and nomadic decorative traditions. The economic foundations of Parthian power rested on their control of the Silk Road trade routes that connected the Roman Empire with China and India, generating enormous wealth through customs duties, protection fees, and direct participation in long-distance commerce. Archaeological evidence from Parthian trading cities reveals the presence of Chinese silk, Indian spices, Roman glass, and precious stones from throughout the known world, demonstrating the extent of commercial networks that enriched the Parthian treasury and funded their military campaigns. The systematic development of irrigation systems, road networks, and urban infrastructure throughout Parthian territories created the economic base necessary to support large armies and maintain the administrative apparatus required for imperial governance. The first major confrontation between the Parthian Empire and Rome occurred during the campaigns of Crassus, the wealthy Roman general who sought military glory to match his political rivals Pompey and Caesar. The Battle of Carrhae, fought in 53 BC in the harsh desert region of northern Mesopotamia, would become one of the most devastating defeats in Roman military history and establish the Parthians as Rome's most formidable eastern adversary. The Roman army that marched into Parthian territory consisted of 7 legions totaling approximately 40,000 troops, supported by auxiliary cavalry and Syrian archers, representing one of the largest military forces Rome had assembled for foreign conquest. The Parthian army that opposed Crassus at Carrhae was commanded by Surina, a young noble whose tactical brilliance and understanding of desert warfare would prove decisive in the coming battle. His force consisted primarily of mounted archers supported by a smaller number of cataphract heavy cavalry, totaling perhaps 10,000 warriors whose mobility and firepower were perfectly suited to the open terrain of the Mesopotamian desert. The Parthian tactical plan involved using their mobility to avoid direct confrontation with Roman infantry while subjecting the legions to continuous archery attacks that would gradually wear down Roman strength and morale. The battle began with the Romans forming their traditional defensive formation, creating a hollow square that protected their supply train while presenting multiple faces to enemy attack. This formation, which had proven effective against Germanic tribes and other barbarian opponents, proved inadequate against Parthian tactics that emphasized mobility and missile warfare rather than direct assault. The continuous rain of arrows from Parthian composite bows began to take a heavy toll on Roman soldiers, whose shields and armor provided only limited protection against the penetrating power of arrows fired from such sophisticated weapons. The death of Crassus during the final phases of the battle eliminated Roman command structure and led to the complete collapse of organized resistance, with thousands of Roman soldiers killed and many more captured to be marched into slavery in distant Parthian territories. The eagle standards of several Roman legions, symbols of imperial power and military honor, were captured by the Parthians and displayed in their temples as trophies of victory. The psychological impact of this defeat resonated throughout the Roman world, demonstrating that Roman military superiority was not absolute and that the Parthians possessed both the capability and determination to defend their territories against imperial aggression. The aftermath of Carrhae established the Euphrates River as the de facto boundary between the Roman and Parthian empires, creating a frontier that would remain largely stable for the next several centuries despite periodic campaigns by both sides. The captured Roman prisoners, including skilled craftsmen and military engineers, were settled in distant Parthian cities where their technical knowledge contributed to imperial building projects and military innovations. Archaeological evidence from these settlements reveals the cultural integration of Roman captives into Parthian society, with their descendants becoming loyal subjects of the Arsacid dynasty while maintaining aspects of their Roman heritage. The reign of Oroda II, who ruled during the victory at Carrhae and its aftermath, represented the height of early Parthian power and cultural achievement. His court at Ctesiphon became a center of learning and artistic patronage that attracted scholars, artists, and craftsmen from throughout the ancient world, creating a cosmopolitan cultural environment that synthesized Greek, Persian, and nomadic traditions. The architectural remains from this period demonstrate the sophisticated building techniques and artistic sensibilities that characterized Parthian civilization at its peak, with massive audience halls, elaborate relief sculptures, and innovative architectural features that influenced building traditions throughout the region. The complex relationship between the Parthian central government and the semi-independent kingdoms that acknowledged Arsacid suzerainty created a political system that balanced imperial control with local autonomy. The great noble families of the Parthian Empire, including the Surin, Karen, and other ancient clans, maintained substantial military forces and governed their territories with considerable independence while providing military service to the Arsacid kings when required. This feudal-like arrangement allowed the Parthians to control vast territories with relatively limited central administration, while ensuring that local knowledge and traditions were preserved and respected. The military innovations that continued to develop throughout the Parthian period included improvements in armor technology, weapons manufacturing, and tactical doctrine that maintained their competitive advantage against Roman and other enemies. The development of specialized arrowheads designed for different tactical situations, including bodkin points for penetrating armor and broadheads for use against unprotected enemies, demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of metallurgy and warfare that characterized Parthian military culture. The systematic breeding of war horses to produce animals with the speed and endurance necessary for mounted archery created bloodlines that were prized throughout the ancient world and contributed to Parthian military effectiveness. The Roman response to the Parthian threat involved significant changes in military organization and tactical doctrine as imperial commanders learned to counter nomadic warfare through improved cavalry forces and modified infantry formations. The development of Roman heavy cavalry units modeled on Parthian cataphracts represented a fundamental shift in Roman military thinking, while the recruitment of auxiliary archers from Syrian and other eastern territories provided the Romans with missile capabilities that could match Parthian archery. These military reforms, implemented gradually over several decades, demonstrated the lasting impact of Parthian military innovations on Roman strategic thinking. The reign of Mithridates II, known as Mithridates the Great, who ruled from approximately 123 to 88 BC, marked another period of Parthian territorial expansion and diplomatic achievement. His campaigns extended Parthian control into Armenia and established diplomatic relations with distant China, creating commercial and political connections that enhanced Parthian wealth and international prestige. The Chinese historical records describe Parthian envoys arriving at the Han imperial court with gifts of exotic birds and precious stones, demonstrating the extent of diplomatic networks that connected the Parthian Empire with civilizations thousands of miles away. The diplomatic relationships that the Parthians maintained with various client kingdoms and tributary states created a complex web of alliances that extended Parthian influence far beyond their directly controlled territories. The Kingdom of Armenia, which occupied a crucial strategic position between the Roman and Parthian empires, became a persistent source of conflict as both imperial powers sought to install friendly rulers and secure their respective frontiers. The succession disputes that regularly occurred in Armenia provided opportunities for both Roman and Parthian intervention, leading to a series of proxy wars that would continue for centuries. The cultural and artistic achievements of the Parthian Empire during its height included the development of distinctive architectural styles, sculptural traditions, and decorative arts that combined influences from multiple civilizations while maintaining a uniquely Parthian character. The rock reliefs at Behistun and other sites demonstrate the sophisticated stone carving techniques that Parthian artists developed to commemorate royal victories and religious ceremonies. The silver vessels, textile fragments, and jewelry found in Parthian archaeological contexts reveal the luxury goods and artistic traditions that characterized imperial court culture and demonstrate the wealth that trade and conquest had brought to the Arsacid dynasty. The Parthian approach to urban planning and architecture created cities that reflected both practical administrative needs and symbolic representations of imperial power. The city of Ctesiphon, which served as the primary Parthian capital, featured massive audience halls with soaring vaulted ceilings that could accommodate thousands of visitors during royal ceremonies and diplomatic receptions. The engineering techniques required to construct these enormous unsupported spans demonstrated the advanced mathematical and architectural knowledge that Parthian builders had developed through centuries of experimentation and cultural exchange. The religious synthesis that characterized Parthian civilization included the preservation and adaptation of Zoroastrian traditions alongside Greek philosophical schools and various mystery religions that appealed to different segments of the population. The Parthian approach to religious diversity reflected both practical political considerations and genuine cultural tolerance, as the rulers recognized that religious persecution would create unnecessary opposition, while religious freedom could strengthen imperial loyalty. Archaeological evidence from Parthian religious sites reveals the complex ceremonial practices and architectural features that accommodated diverse religious communities within the imperial framework. The economic prosperity that characterized much of the Parthian period resulted from their strategic position along major trade routes combined with sound fiscal policies and agricultural development throughout their territories. The systematic development of irrigation systems in Mesopotamia and other regions increased agricultural productivity and supported larger urban populations, while the security provided by Parthian military forces encouraged commercial investment and long-distance trade. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency throughout Parthian territories facilitated commercial exchange and created economic integration that strengthened imperial unity. The challenges that eventually weakened Parthian power included the enormous costs of maintaining large military forces across vast territories, the difficulty of coordinating responses to simultaneous threats on multiple frontiers, and the periodic succession disputes that divided the imperial nobility and weakened central authority. The semi-feudal structure that had initially provided flexibility and local autonomy gradually created centrifugal forces that made unified imperial action increasingly difficult, as powerful noble families pursued their own interests rather than imperial goals. The distance between different parts of the empire made rapid communication and military deployment challenging, creating opportunities for local rebellions and external invasions. The Roman campaigns of Trajan in the early 2nd century CE represented the most serious threat to Parthian territorial integrity since the empire's founding, as the Roman emperor sought to complete the conquest of Mesopotamia and establish permanent imperial control over the wealthy cities of the region. The initial success of Roman forces, including the capture of Ctesiphon and the installation of a Roman client king, demonstrated the vulnerability of Parthian defenses when faced with determined and well-organized opposition. However, the guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Parthian forces, combined with the logistical challenges of maintaining Roman armies so far from their supply bases, ultimately forced Trajan to abandon his conquests and withdraw to more defensible positions. The Parthian recovery following Trajan's withdrawal demonstrated the resilience of their political and military systems, as new leadership emerged to coordinate resistance against Roman occupation and restore Arsacid authority throughout their traditional territories. The siege and recapture of major cities required sophisticated military engineering and organizational capabilities that reflected the continued effectiveness of Parthian administrative and military institutions. The successful expulsion of Roman forces from Mesopotamia restored Parthian prestige and demonstrated that imperial expansion had limits that even Rome could not overcome. The cultural impact of centuries of Roman-Parthian conflict extended far beyond military and political developments to influence art, literature, and intellectual traditions throughout both empires. The mutual respect that developed between Roman and Parthian elites, despite their political antagonism, created cultural exchanges that enriched both civilizations. Roman historians and geographers provided detailed descriptions of Parthian society and customs, while Parthian artistic traditions influenced Roman decorative arts and architectural techniques. The literary traditions that developed around famous battles and diplomatic encounters created narratives that shaped cultural memory and political identity in both empires. The gradual transformation of Parthian society from its nomadic origins to a sophisticated imperial civilization created tensions between traditional tribal values and the requirements of governing settled populations across diverse geographical and cultural regions. The process of urbanization that accompanied imperial expansion changed the social structure of Parthian society, creating new classes of merchants, craftsmen, and administrators who had different interests and perspectives from the traditional nomadic nobility. These social changes, while contributing to imperial wealth and administrative efficiency, also created internal divisions that would eventually weaken Parthian political unity. The religious and philosophical developments that occurred throughout the Parthian period included the growth of new syncretic traditions that combined elements from various spiritual and intellectual traditions. The mystery religions that became popular in Parthian territories offered personal salvation and spiritual transformation that appealed to urban populations seeking meaning beyond traditional tribal loyalties and imperial service. The philosophical schools that developed in Parthian cities created intellectual environments that encouraged scholarly research and artistic creativity, while maintaining connections with the broader intellectual traditions of the ancient world. The technological innovations that emerged from Parthian civilization included advances in metallurgy, engineering, and agricultural techniques that influenced development throughout the region. The improvements in iron and steel production that enabled the creation of superior weapons and tools demonstrate the technical expertise that Parthian craftsmen developed through centuries of experimentation and cultural exchange. The architectural innovations that allowed the construction of large unsupported vaulted spaces influenced building traditions throughout the ancient world and represented genuine advances in engineering knowledge and construction techniques. The diplomatic traditions that the Parthians developed for managing relationships with neighboring powers created precedents for international law and diplomatic protocol that influenced subsequent civilizations. The complex treaty arrangements that governed relationships with Armenia, various Arab tribes, and other client states demonstrated sophisticated understanding of international relations and the balance of power. The ceremonial aspects of Parthian diplomacy, including the elaborate protocols for receiving foreign ambassadors and conducting treaty negotiations, reflected both practical political needs and cultural values that emphasized honor, reciprocity, and mutual respect. The decline of Parthian power during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE resulted from a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures that gradually overwhelmed the empire's ability to maintain territorial integrity and political unity. The increasing power of noble families relative to the central government created conditions similar to feudal anarchy, where local interests took precedence over imperial goals and coordinated action became increasingly difficult. The economic costs of defending vast frontiers against multiple enemies strained imperial resources beyond their capacity, while the social changes that accompanied centuries of imperial rule created new sources of internal division and conflict. The rise of the Sassanid dynasty in Persia during the early 3rd century CE provided the final challenge that the weakened Parthian Empire could not survive. Arsaces I, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, combined religious reform with military innovation to create a powerful movement that appealed to Persian national sentiment, while offering more effective governance than the increasingly dysfunctional Parthian system. The Sassanid victory over the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, at the Battle of Hormizdagan in 224 CE marked the end of nearly 5 centuries of Arsacid rule and the beginning of a new chapter in Iranian history. The legacy of the Parthian Empire extended far beyond its political and military achievements to encompass lasting contributions to art, architecture, literature, and political thought that influenced subsequent civilizations throughout the region. The Parthian synthesis of nomadic military traditions with settled administrative practices created governmental models that were adopted and adapted by later empires, while their tolerant approach to religious and cultural diversity provided examples of successful management of multicultural societies. The artistic traditions that developed during the Parthian period continued to influence decorative arts and architectural design long after the empire's political collapse, demonstrating the enduring appeal of Parthian aesthetic sensibilities. The Parthian Empire had demonstrated that nomadic societies could successfully transition to imperial governance while maintaining their cultural identity and military effectiveness. Their nearly 5-century confrontation with Rome had shaped the development of both civilizations, creating a balance of power that influenced political and military developments throughout the ancient world. The memory of Parthian achievements in warfare, governance, and cultural synthesis would inspire later Persian dynasties and contribute to the rich historical traditions that defined Iranian civilization for centuries to come, ensuring that their remarkable empire would not be forgotten even as new powers emerged to dominate the ancient world.